into meeting myself and Tamara, my partner here today, who will be offering this session to you. I'm Sarah Evans. I am a staff member on the Progress Center. We work with Dr. Tessie Bailey, who you saw in the opening session, and Dr. Caitlin Anderson, who you saw in the opening session, as well as Amy Peterson. My background, before coming to American Institutes for Research, who houses the Progress Center, is I spent 25 years in the public school system as a special education teacher, director, paraprofessional. I think I
The
held
meeting is
every
being recorded.
in. Oh,
Oh,
sorry about that. We'll get that muted. I spent 25 years in that public education sector doing all things in special education. And I'm very excited to be here to offer that information and knowledge to you. And I'm going to toss it over to Tamara to introduce herself quickly.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Again, like Sarah said, my name is Tamara Davis. I have a background in special education and also a little bit in general education. I'm a dually licensed special education and general education teacher, but my heart lies in special education. Um, uh, After teaching, I spent my time coaching beginning teachers, and then now doing a lot of research and coaching, training, and professional learning in special education. So happy to have you all here and join us during our session today.
Thanks, Tamara. We're very excited to see everyone, and we have more people coming in regularly to our waiting room. So it's great to see all of you. We really encourage you during our session today to ensure that you are engaging and asking questions and participating in our activities. The more you participate, the more meaningful the presentation today will be for everybody, including yourself. So we're going to start off by really jumping into a lot of what you heard from the first session this morning. The graphical element or graphical representation here was what Dr. Tessie Bailey shared that we confirmed through our BTO study. So if you were not able to join the opening session, I highly encourage you to go back and listen to that wonderful panel we had around the beating the odds analysis, or our BTO analysis. And we really spent the last 6 years of time at the Progress Center trying to identify what were the things happening within our school systems where we saw students performing at or like their same age peers and potentially even above. And as we heard this morning, we know that belonging was one of the highest indicator in our study. And we are going to start our presentation today really looking at what does it mean to have a culture of belonging? How do we get there with our schools? And we're going to walk you through some of those resources, materials, and help you understand how to start really cultivating this within your own local context. We are then going to move into our, wow, I'm really having trouble with my clicker. So sorry about that. We're going to then move into our individualized instruction and support. So we'll build upon our student belonging and the critical foundation that lays, and then look and take a deeper dive into how do we support that individualized instruction and supports that student needs across time. Today, you'll see these are our outcomes for the session. We want to be able to identify the key indicators for promoting access and progress in the general education curriculum. We want to understand how promoting belonging for students with disabilities increase access. We want to share resources that support belonging for students with disabilities. We talk about this word belonging, and you saw a couple of the key slides and you'll see them again in our presentation. But really, what does it mean to have a culture of belonging, and how is that different than inclusion? And we're going to share some resources that you can take. We will be sharing all of those resources in the chat, so you can open them up, as well as they will be available on the website under this presentation on September 13th. with a list of all of the materials that we share today. We're also going to look at understanding how supplementary aids and services can remove barriers for students with disabilities and their ability to access that general education setting. And we're going to identify instructional behavioral practices. That will be how we close out our session for this afternoon. Again, this is a 3-hour session. We will give a break in the middle and then have people come back about 15 minutes after. And we're ready to start into our content. So the 5 ways that we ensure access and progress for students with disabilities is focusing on promoting belonging, providing adequate support within the general education setting, teaching cognitive and metacognitive strategies, really focusing on teaching social behaviors and the use of instructional technology. Now, many of those things are things you have heard, but we're going to tie them all together about how they promote this access to that general education and ensure that we can make progress with our students. As Tetsi shared, progress goes beyond the IEP and the IEP goals to really looking at meaningful progress in the general education setting. And so that's our whole and goal of today's session, is to say, what does that look like for our students? So we want to start off with a reminder to everybody today that our students with disabilities are gen ed students first. I'm guessing a vast majority of you are special educators, that this is why you're here. For those of you that are not a special educator, who maybe hold a general ed leadership role or a general ed teaching position, our goal at the center is to really help us understand, how do we truly ensure our students with disabilities are gen ed students first? Because in the schools that beat the odds, these students are gen ed students, and they do get a supplemental support through special education, instead of saying they're special education students who access the general ed. There really is a culture of understanding and belief in this area, in those beating the odds schools, that we want to really share and think about how we can increase over time. So when we look at this, we want to look at what do we learn from our national research. So Dr. Bailey shared our own beating the odds analysis, but she also referenced 2 additional studies. And some of that research was really around all students and not students with disabilities. But we know that above and beyond promoting belonging and having a culture of belonging, that we know that consistency and coherence to instruction are critical, ensuring students with disabilities are able to effectively access and make that progress in the general education setting. So you'll notice that it's not saying that we have to have the best instruction, although we know that high quality instruction is always going to be great for students. We know that from this report that even just having very consistent and coherent instruction will be equally as powerful as having the high quality. And we want to just make sure that we focus on that as well. So our foundation at the center was really started around this, the Andrew F. case that was founded by the Supreme Court in 2017. And it really looked at our responsibility to ensure that our IEP programs are reasonably calculated and to enable a child to make progress appropriate in light of the child's circumstances. And this whole 6 years that we have been a center, we have really tried to determine, what does that mean? How do we help people understand? What does reasonably calculated mean? In light of a student's circumstances, what does that mean? And what does progress really mean? And all of the culminating work really points to what we're going to discuss about today, and really looking at, how do we help people access that general education setting? So some important terms that we really want to focus on today is that we know that within IDEA, it cites regular class, and that refers to a location or placement. And that is different than when we reference general education. And that primarily refers to the general education curriculum. So when Tamara and I are speaking today, if we reference general education, we're talking about the overarching curriculum. What is school for any other student that walks through that same set of doors? That is what we're looking at for our students with disabilities. If we say regular class, that means we're talking about the tier one, the core programming classroom where those instructional routines are delivered. So there is a difference, and we just want to make sure that we start today's session with making sure you all are on the same page with the use of our vocabulary. So some examples of misinformation impacting access and progress that we have found over the last 6 years is that we find cultures that once a child has an IEP, all other non-special education supports are no longer permitted. So we see schools that say now that they have an IEP and they've been identified under IDEA, they no longer have access to interventions. They no longer have access to potential title services. And what we know that what that does is that can limit a child's access and progress, because those educators that may be providing some of those other supports may have some expertise in areas in which would benefit the child with the disability. And we want to ensure that they have access like everybody else has access. We know that it's important to improve outcomes for students with disabilities. We only need to improve special education. This is a big focus for schools who are struggling to find that culture and those systems that support students with disabilities. We often see our schools over focusing on fixing special education, how our special education teachers are delivering instruction, where the services are provided, and so on. And that over focus takes away from the bigger picture of ensuring the student has that access and can make progress in the general education curriculum. We want to make sure that we improve on IEP goals is all that matters for students with disabilities. And Dr. Bailey spoke to that today as well, is that we know that there are 4 different types of progress. And a student with a disability needs to be able to make progress in all 4 areas. Yes, they need to progress in their IEP goals, but if they're making progress in their IEP goals and not progressing in the general education curriculum, then there's a disconnect from the IEP goals to what the student really needs to be doing in order to access and benefit from what everyone else is experiencing from school. And then we know that together, when they're making progress on their IEP goal and making progress in the general education curriculum, together they are able to make progress on state and district assessments and ultimately have post-secondary outcomes, which is what we are hoping to have. We also want to ensure that we provide special education is separate from the general ed. We see that often. Or special education is a place where a student can get caught up on missing work in their general education setting. I'm sure many of you have seen these misinformations that impact this. We provide services and technologies to students with disabilities is cheating. For instance, a big conversation right now is AI. And how do we use AI effectively with our students with disabilities? Many people see that as cheating for all students, but really AI is an opportunity for some of our students with disabilities to have a greater level of access to that general education setting for various ways. So helping change that thought process and culture is important, and we'll get to that. The general education teachers don't need to focus on the needs of the student with a disability, because that student is the sole responsibility of the special educator. And I saw a couple people put in the chat that they see some of these things happening, whether that's in your own current district, your own role, maybe it's a previous district you've been in, but these are highly impactful for why across the nation, students with disabilities progress is stagnant. We highlighted some schools in our Beating the Odds studies, but overall, we had very limited schools that were actually making progress with students year after year. And a lot of it has to do with this misinformation that's impacting their access and ability to make progress.
Yeah,
So
and Sarah, just real quick before we move on, I'm sure there were probably a few reactions, maybe not in the chat, but I'm just curious since we do have a larger group here, any reactions to, what you just heard. Maybe you've experienced this before, heard these things before, but just any initial reactions to those examples.
and again, you can come off mute.
Oh,
Yeah.
hi.
I-
My
Go
name's
ahead.
Wendy Schmafe. I'm a director of student services from Canoga Park. The only thing that I would say in the last statement, general education teachers don't need to focus on the needs of students with disabilities. We're a full inclusion school. We have no special day classes, and we have our resource teachers are part of the collaboration that works in the class. But our gen ed teachers are vested on supporting those kids like 100%. And they don't necessarily, they feel as the resource teacher that comes in or works with them is that extra support, and they know they manage the IEP, but they feel that's their kid, that's on their caseload, and that's their kid. So I would say that statement could be different depending on if it's a special day program where they are housed by the sped teacher. That might be different, but in a full inclusion program, general education teachers are so important. They're valued just as much as the sped teacher. So that was my only comment.
I appreciate that, Wendy. And I think that many people, I saw a lot of head shaking. I saw some heart emojis come up on the screen with your comment. And I think you're right. I think it so depends on the environment and how you have it set up. And the fact that you have a full inclusion setting does change some of those dynamics. And so I appreciate you sharing that because I know people are striving towards that regularly.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Did somebody else want to say something? All right.
Yeah, I just wanted Candace Lindsay here. Hi.
Hi.
I just wanted to mention that it just seems like at the various schools that I've been in Las Vegas, particularly, there a lot of the schools do not see the students, the special education students, as gen ed students first, right? And so even in conversation, it's like your student, right? Like they belong to me and me only, and it's our student, right? And so that piece really gets missed. And then because of that mind frame or being in that mindset, it's anytime the documentation comes down the line and you're saying, okay, well, can you go back and fix this assignment? We got to go ahead. We got to give more time. Okay, let's go ahead and make these alterations. It's like, oh, I got more work to do. Oh, it's always something, and I think it starts with the frame of mind and understanding exactly when gen ed understands what exactly the role is of the special educator. And not only that, but the gen ed understand their role as a gen ed teacher with special education students. It just works a whole lot better. But until that frame of mind is changed and we can become more collaborative and at least stream the minds or become more like-minded, it's a difficult task.
Yes. And I want to thank you for sharing the idea of defining the roles. That is one of our overarching outcomes that we understood from the center is that educators in general, you talked about leadership, you talked about the general education teacher, the special education teacher, the related service provider. What we're really finding in the field is people have a large confusion around what is the role of each person on the IEP team. And what does it mean? I saw several people say, well, my general ed teachers are warm bodies that sit in the IEP meeting. Oftentimes that comes from a lack of understanding of what their role is in supporting that student. I saw somebody else talk about their leadership and that the lead in the chat, they shared about how their leadership is not necessarily setting the expectation or setting that vision of all of our responsibilities to ensure all of our kids, including our students with disabilities, are really looked at as a whole, and we support all of them. We do have another center, and I'm going to ask to drop it in the chat, but a link to the Lead IDEA Center. If you know of any general education leaders, or you are one yourself, we did launch a new center just 2 years ago that is focused on supporting general education administrators' understanding and ability to implement IDEA. And there's a lot of resources that is tailored specifically to the role of the leader. They do share some of our resources because our resources can be universal. But they also have a lot of their own resources. So if that's helpful because you're feeling that that's an issue or a misinformation that's impacting your students' ability to access the general education curriculum, please share in any way that you can those resources. And I know Tamara just shared that with you. And I appreciate everybody sharing out because I think, and Tamara, thank you for stopping me as I just get going in the comments or the flow of the presentation. It's really interesting to see how many people today have stated that they're feeling some of these types of frustrations and experiences within their day-to-day work. So when we move on and we start thinking about, we talk about access and progress, and Dr. Bailey shared this slide, but we wanted to share it again in case there were people that weren't able to make it, but also to really reiterate the critical piece of understanding what we mean when we say progress for students with disabilities. We know that ultimately we want post-secondary success, and all of us are measured by indicator 14 about whether or not our students are able to be employed or go to a post-secondary type of education or a training program. We know that in order for students to be ready for post-secondary success, that they have to be successful on the state and district assessments, because that means they're getting what they need from the general education setting. And then ultimately, when we're talking about our students with disabilities, we know that they need to be able to make progress in their IEP goals. What we often find over the past 6 years is that there's this really big focus on allowing students to, or focusing only on students to make progress on their IEP goals. And when we think about that, it is one part of progress. But again, if they're not making progress across all 4 areas, then ultimately we're not ensuring the students are going to be successful post high school. And that is part of what the meaning of IDEA is that we ensure that they have the same opportunities as all other students have. And our special educators often get very focused on the idea of, I write an IEP goal, I'm monitoring the progress, and they're making progress. And we forget to step out and say, we need to collaborate with my general education teachers to say, is what we're working on in their services allowing them to be more successful in that general education setting? And we miss that step that often keeps progress in this first tiny box, and we don't move it to the other 3 boxes over time. And we're going to talk today, as we go further in this, about how we can really ensure progress. And I am going way the wrong direction. I apologize. Wow. I need to stop using my mouse. Okay, there we go. All right, so in addition to our elements that we talked about earlier and how we're going to be focusing on student belonging and individualized instruction, we also know, and many of you brought this up in our discussion, that we have these facilitators that are kind of foundational pieces to ensure that the system can work, and that we have these 5 elements in place. They give us the building blocks to get there. And you can see, we brought up leadership, how critical effective leadership is, not just with our general education leaders, but also our special education directors, our teacher leaders. It's all those that hold leadership roles that really are critical in this work. We also know that having a collective understanding of holding high expectations for our students with disabilities is critical. We're going to talk about what does it mean to have high expectations, and what is some of the research showing us about those high expectations. We know family engagement. Again, Dr. Bailey shared, originally that was one of our 5 major indicators of the strong systems. But now we know that it's actually a foundational piece and it's blended into everything that we do. Family engagement is a part of all of the work that we're doing. We know that data literacy has to be blended into all of these 5 critical elements, as well as collective efficacy. And what is the impact of a belief system that we believe all students can learn at high levels? So I want to take a second and I want you to think about these questions. We're going to do a waterfall activity, which means I would like you to yourself in your chat, without hitting send right away, please answer the following question. What does it mean for all staff to have high expectations for students with disabilities? So go ahead and put that in the chat and hold your answer. Don't hit enter yet. When I say count back from 3, we're going to hit 3 and we're going to see what does a collective group that's here today think it means for all staff to have high expectations for students with disabilities. So I'm going to pause, give you a second to answer that question, and then I'll count back from 3 and we'll all hit the enter button together. Okay, on the count of 3, we're all going to hit enter. 1, 2, 3. Oh my goodness.
Wow.
It's going so fast, I can't even read it.
I know. I'll try to pick some random ones out as they come through. Knowing what the students can do and not what they can't do. Students with disabilities are capable of meaning learning, growth, and achievement regardless of disability. I'm seeing the word rigor. I'm seeing a lot of high expectations, not limiting expectations, knowing and focusing on their strengths, ensuring they have access to the general education curriculum, holding students accountable for their participation. So a lot of shared belief around what high expectations and collective efficacy looks like for students with disabilities.
Awesome. And thanks for doing that quick recap for me, Tamara. That was very helpful. And it's very interesting when we do these activities across the nation is that we get a lot of the same types of comments. And I think what that tells us is that we know what it means to have high expectations and build that collective efficacy, but oftentimes we struggle to know how do we impact that from the role that we have within our local school district all the way to our own belief system. And how do we ensure that we are really focusing on being able to be a part of that change and bring activities that are meaningful to help others be able to make that change over time. So what we're going to look at now is really what does it mean to have collective efficacy? And our collective efficacy is the way we want to look at, and I saw this comment come through earlier about that there's no way a single teacher has all the time, all the knowledge, and all the skills to meet the needs of every student in his or her class. And notice that it says a single teacher. It doesn't say a single special ed teacher. It doesn't say a single gen ed teacher. It really means a teacher does not have all the knowledge and skills to meet all of their needs. And that together, we ultimately have to work as a team in order to ensure success. Our picture here illustrates what often happens and what many of our special educators report to us as why they're frustrated in their role. They feel burnt out. They feel like they don't make a difference in the students that they're working with educational path. it's because they do solely feel like it's the weight of all of this on their shoulders. Maybe that's you. Maybe that's resonating with you today and saying, yeah, that's me. I feel like it's my sole job to ensure that my caseload is making progress and everyone's on looking at me if they are not. And what we know is that unless we build a culture where it is everyone's responsibility and we all share this, we will likely struggle to see that bigger change for our students over time. We know that we are better together, that it takes each member and their expertise of the IEP team's expertise to really cultivate a program that allows that student to flourish and make meaningful progress. You heard that with our opening panel. We had a principal, an assistant principal, a special education director. I know when we did our interviews, they had their teachers on in those interviews as well. And each one of them had a role. Each one of them knew how they were impactful to that student and how they teamed together to ensure those students were making progress. For many of you have heard of Hattie and John Hattie's work around collective efficacy. But we illustrate in this slide here, why do we say that collective efficacy is a critical piece of ensuring that we have sustainable systems for students with disabilities? And you can see, for those of you that are not familiar with his work, he did a meta-analysis of all the research around why students are successful in school, not just students with disabilities, but all students. And that meta-analysis looked at all of the research out there and took all of the different research studies and analyzed them and said, what do they show? And over time, he has created a list. You can go to Visible Learning and see his work. And the number one impactful change for students at overall is the idea that there's a sense of collective efficacy, that we can change outcomes for students, that we believe that by working as a team, we are able to truly impact all students and that they all have the ability to learn at high levels. And you can see that this graphic really illustrates that a single teacher's ability to change is a 3.2. We know that a 0.4 is called the hinge point. That is where we go from little to medium progress to a large or extensive progress. And so that orange line represents that hinge point. So a single teacher, they make progress with students, but you can see that when you put a team of people around students, that 1.75 becomes that effect size. That is multiple years progress in 1 year's time if you equate it out to annual year progress. That means that as a team, we have evidence to show that this is the way we have to work together. And this is why this piece is so foundational to ensuring students with disabilities have access and can make progress. We know that collective efficacy starts with the right questions. We have to be asking these questions, and sometimes these questions are hard to ask. But we need to know, what do we want for our students, educators, and families? And I think we think about that a lot, but what do we really want for them? What the second question is the one I think we skip over the most, but what is the current reality and who are the players? So many of you shared in the chat today about situations or cultures that you're dealing and managed with or you've experienced in the past. And oftentimes we don't sit down and say, what is our current reality? And why are we experiencing what we're experiencing? And who are the players that are here or not here? And who do we need to bring to the table? And how do we address that current reality? Then we need to ask, what do our students and families need to be successful? And what does that really mean? What does success look like for each student? And you heard the panel talking about how they met on each kiddo and talked about what success was. I'm not sure they used the word success, but that's what I heard when they were speaking today. And then finally, how do we maximize our resources to support students and families? Those are our critical questions. We know that if we're aligning and asking these questions, we develop higher quality IEPs. We see students who have a sense of belonging within their school community. And we know that then the educators all involved in that process really share that collective belief system. I'm going to turn it over to Tamara.
Thanks. And then we're moving into our discussion around high expectations. So when we did our waterfall activity, I saw the word rigor pop up a whole lot in terms of what you all see as having high expectations, especially for our students with disabilities. So I am going to play a video for you all. It's one of the Progress Center's stories from the classroom. This will be one of many resources that we'll share in the rest of this presentation today. But it is a very powerful video. I think Sarah and myself could agree that no matter how many times we've seen this video, I mean, I still get goosebumps just hearing Billy talk about his story and how impactful, his teachers having high expectations was for him. So I'm going to play this video for you all, and then we'll have just a brief discussion afterwards.
In this Stories from the Classroom video, Billy Pickens tells us how his teachers' high expectations for him may not have been welcome in high school, but that as an adult who is deafblind, he now appreciates how important it was for his future.
On the first couple of days of school, and I was young at the time, so I didn't recognize this, but teachers weren't really giving me the same work. In fact, in the beginning, I was placed in a special ed class, even though I had been mainstream throughout elementary school. And so their automatic assumption was that I needed to be in a special ed class. But they realized, oh, he kind of surpassed the class and what they were doing, so they put me back in mainstream. And then when I got mainstream, some of the teachers were very kind of hesitant about how to teach me. And so I definitely felt like at the time I was kind of not thinking much of it because they weren't really giving me work, and I guess I was fine with that because I was 12 and I didn't want work. But I think that later on I realized that there was a lot of under expectation and a lot of just wanting to pass me up and not really treat me the same way as my sighted peers.
One English teacher made a lasting difference for Billy's future.
He called a meeting and he was like, your writing is really good. And he was like, why are you in standard? You should be in honors with this kind of writing. And I said, well, I don't want to do the homework. And he was like, well, I can help that. You can stay in standard, but I'm going to give you honors level work. And so he kept me in standard. I thought he was joking, but then all of a sudden points get taken off or commas here. And it got to the point where me, and my mom were all kind of butting heads about it because I need the class to graduate, and he was being extremely hard on me. But at the time, I didn't really like it because, like I said, I didn't want to do the work. And later on, he told my mom, he was like, I know we can do it. I know we can do it. So I really gave it my all eventually, and I did pass the class and did well.
So what does Billy recommend for educators to promote progress for students with disabilities?
Leave your biases at the door and just walk in and see people as individuals. I know that sometimes it can be hard, and I understand that we're all kind of judgmental in some way at times. We all kind of look at people or have a first impression of people. But I think as a teacher, do your best to try to realize that anyone who walks in your classroom likely wants an education. They may not realize it at that point because they may be young and just kids, but I think everybody genuinely wants to learn something. And so I think if you see that and see beyond what disability they have or what race they are or whatever it might be, I think that you can realize that at the end of the day, everybody wants to learn and everybody can learn.
Billy graduated from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte in 2020. He now works for the Exceptional Children's Assistance Center, leading the youth advisory team and youth newsletter while developing his very own podcast series.
All right. So while the video was happening, I saw lots of hearts flying, and just hearing his story and how impactful just having those high expectations, like keeping that rigor in mind when we're setting goals for our students with disabilities, how important that can be. So just really quickly in the chat, we're going to do a quick activity. So share what you feel needs to happen to ensure that all students with disabilities in your school or your local context are being held to high expectations. So what would that look like or feel like for students? While you all are responding, Sarah did go ahead and put the link to the video in the chat. This is one of the resources that is on our Progress Center website. There's also a discussion guide that accompanies this video. So if you wanted to do this as a short video in your school, maybe you want to do this during a staff meeting, as a kickoff, to think about having high expectations for students with disabilities in your schools, there's an accompanying discussion guide and how you can incorporate that as a short activity. But looking at some of the responses, I'm seeing building relationships, looking for strengths, more training for all, dropping all misconceptions that students with disabilities have a limited capacity. Absolutely, never assume their abilities. We talk about assume-aside all the time, not assuming things. Having high expectations in general, yes. Working with staff on their biases. Collaboration across all levels. Again, not assuming competence and making connections. So seeing lots of different things around what it looks like or what it would feel like to have high expectations for students with disabilities. Anything I missed, Sarah? There's so many. So thank you for sharing your thoughts.
No, I love to see that it's so aligned so that most people see this. And I think it's easy. I'll just add to, we know this, like, and when we have this discussion and we go through these trainings, people are like, yeah, we know that. But it goes back to how do we start that? And so I just shared the discussion guide that Tamara referenced. If this is a hard conversation for you to have within your local context, we have seen many districts take this video. It's very short. They open up the discussion guide and they start to have some of these conversations within a staff meeting, a PLC. Some people use it for a training, and it really helps start to break down some of the barriers and walls and learn about why maybe someone has low expectations or they don't even realize that they have low expectations. So hopefully that resource could be helpful for you individually to start cultivating this type of mindset in your local setting.
Absolutely. And here we just wanted to share just another tidbit of research. Maybe this is not an aha for you in what the research is saying, but it says that teachers and parents typically hold significantly lower educational expectations for our students with disabilities. And again, this might not be an aha for you. This may be something that you see all the time, right? Again, so assuming sometimes that, just because a student has a particular disability of what they may be capable of doing. So again, going back to that belief and focusing on the rigor when we're thinking about what are the goals that we want our students to reach. Maybe sometimes we might say, this is what the goal, and maybe we want to take it a step further. So we're ensuring that that rigor is present.
And I will say, Tamara, can I just add something to be aware of from this research is that students have the lowest expectation. Once they are identified, their expectation drops exponentially, lower than teachers, lower than parents. And they often need people around them. And I think you heard that in Billy's video. saying, you can do this. We see this in you, because they feel so much like they are different and that they cannot perform like everybody else, because somehow we've communicated that inadvertently through this work. And so I think it's important to realize that, yes, teachers and parents have low expectations, but the students have the lowest expectations of themselves. And we are critical in helping change that.
Yeah. And also, to add to that too, I always think back to my experiences and even my experiences now where, I have, my nephew, family members, small children with disabilities. And when he learned of his disability, once he was newly identified, and, things changed for him, his placement, things like that. We, had to have conversations with him because he started to hear, little things like, oh, OHI, what's OHI? What's ADHD? And so it was more so having a conversation with him too about confidence, not just because you might be a child with a disability, it doesn't mean that you're not capable of so many things. It just means that now we might have a better understanding of why you might do certain things and how we may be able to move you forward. So I know I saw some things in the chat about confidence and about building those relationships. So, relationships are absolutely important because, again, you'll be able to have those conversations and talk to them about, what these things might mean, but also making sure that they have higher expectations for themselves as well. So in our next section, we are going to focus on belonging. So going back to our outcomes for this session, ensuring that students have access, starting with belonging. So in this next section, we'll talk about what belonging might mean and talk about some resources that are aligned with that and how you can increase what belonging might feel like or look like for students with disabilities in your context. So again, another activity because we definitely want to keep you engaged. So think about a time when you really felt like you fit in or you belong. So we want you to think about up to 5 words that would describe how you felt. So feel free to go ahead and start adding those things to the chat, and we'll start looking at those responses. I'm already seeing safe, accepted, valued, capable, loved, listened
Heard.
to,
I love heard.
yeah, heard, empowered, welcomed. Yeah, I've seen more seen, heard, supported, friendship, respected,
Appreciated. Mhm.
yeah, appreciated, cared for, comfortable. Yeah. So I'm seeing a lot of similarities, recognized, known. So seeing a lot of similarities. And when you actually felt like you fit in or you belong somewhere. So seeing some similarities in those feelings there. So in this next video, again, it's another resource that you'll find on our website, and we'll also add this video into the chat. This video is a little bit longer because it is going to talk about the various ways in which we would define belonging in schools. So it is going to talk about those different ways in this video. So it is about a little bit over 8 minutes there, but after that, we'll talk about some resources that are aligned with this video and how you can, again, take this back to your local context to talk about how to foster belonging in your local context.
Think about a time you felt like you fit in. What are a couple of words that describe how you felt? Our schools should be places of belonging for every student, including students with disabilities. We want students to feel at home in our schools and classrooms, to be real, true members of their school community. We want them to feel valued and accepted by their peers, school staff, teachers, and others. As educators and administrators, we strive to create the kinds of opportunities among students that we know lead to reciprocal relationships and, hopefully, friendships. Belonging can be elusive for so many of our students with disabilities. Belonging can't be assumed, and it's not always experienced. Often, our efforts to foster relationships tend to take a backseat to our focus on academic, behavioral, and other outcomes. So what is belonging, and what does it take to make belonging a reality? In essence, how students with disabilities have accessed the school community has changed over time. Dr. Eric Carter offers this illustration to help us understand how students' engagement in the school community has changed over time. Prior to what we now know as the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, many students with disabilities were excluded from school communities. IDEA created greater school access for students with disabilities, although some students, even today, receive their education in segregated programs in the school or, in some cases, in separate schools. Early attempts to integrate students with disabilities into school communities were often limited to specific activities, such as lunch or recess, or to specific classes or times of the day. Students with disabilities were viewed as a group within the larger school community rather than as valued individuals, and interactions among students with and without disabilities were limited. Today, most educators aim to support students with disabilities access to and progress in the general curriculum. We often hear educators reference inclusion programs or classrooms where students with disabilities are being educated with peers without disabilities. However, inclusion is just one component of being a valued member of the school community. As illustrated in the image, students with disabilities are still seen as different or as needing more support than students without disabilities. Inclusion is seen as something we do to or for students with disabilities. Belonging is more than inclusion. It is the difference between being included in the community and being a valued, indispensable member of the community. With belonging, students with disabilities are viewed as general education students who contribute to and are supported by the school community. Doctors Eric Carter and Elizabeth Biggs identified 10 key intersecting dimensions of belonging. To belong is to be present, invited, welcomed, known, accepted, supported, heard, and befriended, needed, and loved. To belong, students with disabilities need to be physically present. They participate with children with and without disabilities in all the general activities of a school. Being present is built on the idea of shared experiences and repeated encounters over time. It's about being part of the everyday fabric of school life. Belonging is about being personally invited by peers and educators, sending the message, "We want you here." Being personally invited is different than a general announcement that everyone is welcome or an assumption that everyone will feel invited to participate. Being invited might include being asked to sit with peers at lunch, play games at recess, collaborate on a project, join a club, or come to a birthday party. Belonging is about feeling welcomed, about being received by others with warmth, friendliness, and an authentic delight. Students tend to feel welcomed when others greet them, engage them in conversation, and join them in shared activities. As we think about being welcomed, it is important to assess whether our environment and schedule are set up in a way that welcomes students with disabilities. Belonging is about being known. Helping students belong means getting to truly know each student's strengths, interests, and positive qualities, which allows students to be seen as indispensable. Having relationships with people who understand and affirm you is an important aspect of belonging. Belonging is about being accepted as you are. Promoting acceptance means proactively addressing attitudes and ensuring all students feel embraced for who they are. Knowing you are liked by others contributes to feelings of self-worth, gives you roots, and makes school more enjoyable. As we think about acceptance, we think about the importance of what we model and the examples we provide. We know that when we hold high expectations, use affirming language, and support shared activities, attitudes start to change. Belonging is about being supported. To ensure students with disabilities have the opportunities to meaningfully engage with peers, feel accepted, and participate in the activities they are invited to, we know that they will often need individualized supports aligned to their needs. To provide these supports, we need to build the capacity of staff and students to provide natural supports as much as possible. These supports could look like students participating in cooperative learning with classmates, working toward collective learning goals, and navigating challenges together as peers. Belonging is about having a voice and being heard. Students must be listened to in order to build self-determination and empowerment. Ask yourself, how can we ensure the perspectives of students are sought out, listened to, and respected by others? Belonging is rooted in being befriended, and being befriended is about having people in our lives who know us and like us and miss us and love us. Friendship is at the heart of our well-being, including for students with disabilities. Fostering friendships requires facilitating shared activities, teaching appropriate social behaviors, and planning opportunities for social connections over time. Ask yourself, how can we provide students opportunities to develop relationships with their peers that are marked by reciprocity and mutual enjoyment? Belonging is about being needed. The richest form of communities are marked by real reciprocity. Having a sense of significance and importance requires being both a recipient of support and a contributor to the community. Providing valued roles and opportunities to contribute allows students to be truly needed within the community. An indicator of being needed is when your presence is missed. We may ask ourselves, how can we ensure that all students are valued by others and considered to be indispensable members of the school community? Belonging is about being loved for who we are. Ultimately, a sense of unconditional love and belonging flourishes in caring, mutually invested communities. How can we ensure students experience deep and gracious love from others? By intentionally addressing all 10 dimensions, schools can build inclusive communities that promote belonging. Building inclusive communities requires prioritizing belonging alongside academic instruction, evaluating progress, and taking committed action. When we create authentic communities of belonging, all students can thrive and reach their fullest potential.
Perfect. So I know that was a bit longer, but thank you so much for staying engaged with us. So I love seeing that Eric Carter was a keynote for one of your local conferences. So in addition to that video on our website, there's also supplemental activities that you'll be able to grab from our website and use in your local context, but we'll get to that. But as we look at the 10 dimensions of belonging, and we just heard them all explained in that video, just curious to hear from you all. Is there one particular area that you feel like you are doing well in your local context, just as like an immediate thought from everyone? And it could be one or two areas that you may feel like you do really well to foster belonging in your context. And if you want to come off mute, you can do that too.
Hi, I'd like to share verbally. I think heard is one of the ones that I feel like my team and I do well in our context. We support from the state agency just through the vehicle of mathematics, and when working with special educators and them coming to the table to discuss assessments for our state assessments, getting their input on what they need instructionally. So if you're setting the expectation for assessment, what are the things that we can do to support you with instruction so that you can, you feel like you are equipped enough to meet the needs of your students. And we even had one educator this past summer before sharing, she said she felt heard, and that was the first time in that sort of context that she felt that way. And so it really resonated with me and really sat on my heart. So allowing educators to feel heard. I think that's one of the 10 areas that I feel like we're doing very well.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, especially from your perspective in your position of how you can foster belonging for the staff that work in your district. So thank you for sharing.
And Tamara, I just want to add that I think this graphic is so critical because we hear this word belonging. It's kind of becoming a new like coin phrase or like the new inclusion, the new word for inclusion. And what I think is so critical about the work around belonging that Eric Carter has done and his willingness to partner with us at Progress Center is really defining what that means and how when one of these elements isn't there, then you don't really have belonging. And when you watch the video back a second time, it really defines that belonging is one step above inclusion because it's about feeling valued in a community and being a part and if you're not a part of that community, if you're missed. And so it's often hard. We get that question a lot about what's the difference between inclusion and belonging. When we really get into the heart of it, what is that difference? And kids can be in the room. And we have a video that I shared in the link. I just shared the website page that has all of our resources for belonging. There's another video we're not showing today that's called More Than a Seat in the Room. And it's actually from a parent perspective and how her students experienced inclusion versus experienced a real sense of belonging in his school classroom. And so if that's another video that is helpful for you, I just wanted to throw that out there as well.
Yeah, no, thank you. And even in the chat, I see your responses about things that you all are doing well and known, understand, welcome. So it's nice to see that while sometimes we might not be emphasizing all of these things, it's still nice to see, a few things that you may be doing well. And then now hearing about the different dimensions, it may have you also thinking about how can we take this a step further to incorporate more of these dimensions of belonging. So thank you all for sharing that. Also, too, a thought that I always have when I watch this video or think about this work is, I previously have worked in, what we called a full inclusion school where, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting your name. You talked about how you don't have, special classes or special ed classrooms in your setting. And it was a similar setting that I was in and teaching in. And I loved it because it was like, yeah, all of my students are in the classroom with me. All of their services are happening here. And while certain students might be included in certain activities, I had to think about how to take it a step further and ensure belonging for all of them to make sure they felt valued and respected and all of these different aspects of belonging, ensuring that at all points in time. And what I realized, and what I'm sure you all realized too, is they were extremely successful. And even now, I'm still hearing from parents or even those students who were in my classrooms. It was like they say thank you because they said this was the one time when I came to school that I felt all of these different things. It wasn't just I was in your classroom and I had a seat. So fostering all of these things are extremely beneficial to the child and extremely powerful.
Yeah, I wanted to say also the other thing too that in that full inclusion program that's so important in our school is advocacy for themselves. So it's not just about they're in my class and everybody has this role and what do we do, but what is their role? How do they fit in and how do they feel about themselves? And that is so crucial too, because you're developing their self-esteem, their personality, everything. And one of the things that we do really, really hard and really well is my resource teachers provide what we call their tools. They have their learning tools. And before on day one, they start. Every student that has an IEP has their own little folder of learning tools. It doesn't look anything different that acknowledges them. It's just their tools. We tell them it's no different than classes. You have glasses, you need to see better. You have your tools, you need to work better. These are the tools that help you be successful. So we use that as a way to not only help them feel confident, but to know, oh yeah, I need something. What do I do? Oh yeah, I go to my tools. So they don't always have to ask the teacher for help. They can ask themselves because you really want to promote that self-confidence, that drive for learning, and for them to know I don't need everybody else to help me. I can help myself because that is equally important in having them be successful and go along. So that's another thing that we do as far as our inclusion program that I think is really, really good.
Absolutely. Very powerful. Did anyone else want to share?
Samara, there's a question. It says, how does everyone contribute, not just receive? I guess it's not really a question, but I think they're pointing out the importance of like how can people contribute to what's happening and not just receive in a classroom. And we forget we are teachers by nature, all of us. And so we often feel like it's our job to just disseminate and we forget that there is that opportunity to ensure that others have a contribution. And I think when we also think about the IEP team and developing higher quality IEPs and what is the role of the gen ed and special ed, that's part of the role is that I want to contribute to ensuring that the student is successful. Everybody wants to, but what does that look like in defining that?
Yeah. So to wrap up this section here, you all saw this graphic presented in the video. Some of us here are are inclusion, but when we start to add in those different dimensions of what belonging looks like and how to promote it, it looks and feels a lot different for our students with disabilities. And then I also mentioned, and Sarah also put in the chat the link to the webpage that includes all of the resources that will go along with this video, the webinar, the PowerPoint, and then also the discussion guide. So it has a reflection activity that will allow you all to think about these dimensions and if you feel like they're being exemplified in your local context. And it also asks these accompanying questions like, what are we doing really well right now? So I know I presented that question to you all and you thought about it. But then also taking it a step further to think about what could you all be doing better or differently, and then what should we be doing? What should we be doing in order to lead the charge? So this is an activity that goes along with this. That you could all take this, not only just take this video, but have supplemental activities to go along with it. And then looking at the additional resources. So again, this is going to be the website that first talks a little bit about student belonging and what that looks like. So we saw our video today, but this is going to be the webinar from Eric Carter that talks about the 10 ways that schools can foster belonging for students with and without disabilities. And then on that the right-hand side, you see the discussion guide that I was referring to. Along with that, there's also another story from the classroom that focuses on finding belonging. So if you enjoyed the video that we shared with you about Billy and high expectations, you'll really enjoy, I think you'll enjoy all of our stories from the classrooms, but I'm biased. But really, it's still very powerful. Another story from the classroom about finding belonging. And then in addition to that, on the right-hand side, you see another discussion guide. So it walks you through, watching the video, how to use the discussion guide. It comes with questions and then additional materials to take it a step further. And then another resource is, I believe someone shared, just asking students how they may feel or, being able to provide their input. So another resource that you'll find on the Progress Center's website is this this sheet that will allow student or like walk you through how students can add their input for IEP meetings. You may be doing something similar to this already, but this is another tool to add to your toolboxes for how to prep students for meetings so that they are able to, be heard and share, their needs and things that they would like to see happen for themselves. And we're sharing all of these links in the chat, not to worry. But all of these resources that we're sharing today are going to be on the Progress Center website.
All right, we're going to get started again. I hope everybody had a chance to take care of themselves and give yourself a chance to stand up and stretch, as I know this is a longer virtual session. And so sometimes we need to have that break in order to keep engaged. And we really appreciate the engagement we've had today. It's been awesome to hear your feedback and have you participate in the activities. We're going to be moving into our next session, using supplementary aids and services to promote access. We're going to be doing a few activities in here, and we really hope that you're able to engage with these activities with us as well. So it's critically important that we spent the first hour and a half of this session really talking about the foundational pieces, the culture, the system. How do we need to create that within our school to ensure that our students with disabilities have access and can make progress in the general education setting? Now we're going to move a little more into what is our obligation to ensure access and progress, and how do we leverage some of that and our understanding of that to gain some traction with our teams and our staff. So when we look at what's on the screen today, and Tamara is going to drop these two tip sheets. So if you are new to Progress Center and you have not seen our tip sheet collection, she will put that, Tamara, you keep switching screens into your other sheet. It's okay. If you have not seen our tip sheet collection, we highly recommend. We have one for every component of the IEP. We have family tip sheets, and most of them are in at least English and Spanish. And then some of them have been translated into other languages as well. So you can check that out on our website. But Tamara is going to, in the chat, drop the class statement and the measurable annual goal tip sheet for you to reference. But when we look at the definition of an individualized program for a student, it's really focusing on the fact that we have a statement of the child's present level of academic and functional performance. This statement is how the child's disability affects the student's involvement and progress in the general education curriculum. So right there in the law, under the class statement, it states that we need to be able to articulate that in our IEP document. But above and beyond the document, we really need to be able to articulate that so that we can develop programming that is appropriate, which really gets to that implementation of the IEP. We can also see that under measurable annual goals within the IEP, you can see that the measurable annual goals statement includes academic and functional goals, and it is there to meet the child's needs that result from the child's disability, to enable the child to be involved in and make progress in the general education curriculum. Again, there is another place in which we know that this requirement is there. Now, many of you are special educators. Many of you have been doing this work for a long time. And when I was a special education director and I did this work for many years, it was often enlightening to me to see how many people really didn't understand what does IDEA actually say we need to do. And so these tip sheets really help break that down and really highlight the critical piece of ensuring that we're not just looking at progress on the IEP goal, that we're looking at progress in the general education curriculum, but we then have to help the student access that effectively with their services and supports. So in the next slide, we're going to really dive into our idea of this progress. We get focused on that IEP goal, which we know is important. But again, through our law, it says we need to ensure that they're having progress over in all of these areas. And how do we do that? We utilize our statement of services and aids. So on the next slide, we're going to take a second and I'm going to actually ask you to read this to yourself. What does IDA actually say about the statement of services and aids? So I'm going to pause here for a second, read the big paragraph after the 4. And if you have any ahas, if you have any questions, if you have any thoughts, just put them in the chat. We'll keep going through this over the next several slides, but just capture them in the chat so we can make sure we answer any of those or highlight any of the ahas. Okay, so again, if you have any ahas or any questions or any wonderings, feel free to put them in the chat at any point, or if you really want to come off of mute, just raise your hand and let us know. But as we look at this and we look at this tip sheet, Tamara did add it to the chat for you to reference if it's easier to read on your own screen. You can see that the statement of services and aids is made up of 4 components. It's services in special education, related services, supplementary aids and services, and program modifications or supports for school personnel. Each one of those 4 areas is a critical piece that makes up the programming for our students with disabilities. Some students with disabilities may only need 1 or 2 of these. Some students may need to have areas addressed in all 4 of these. But can anyone in the chat or come off mute tell me which one is critical or required in order to meet criteria under IDEA? Which one of these 4 areas is required to meet under IDEA? You can put it in the chat or you can come off of mute. All right, good. I see some people putting it in there. Special education. Special education is what makes special ed special. And we know that the 2-prong approach is that we are eligible under a disability category and we are in need of special education services and or related services. And so these 4 parts are critical. Defining these 4 parts for members of the IEP team help clarify where each person plays a role in ensuring that these services are met. So next slide, Tamara.
And really quick, oh, sorry. Sorry, I thought I advanced the slide. I would say there were a couple of comments in the chat. I think this is referring back to there's the slide on the PLAF statement, and maybe Denise will come off mute, but her wondering was around, or I guess maybe her comment was just around the difficulty in writing the statement. I think she's referring to the PLAF statement, but Denise, if you want to just come off mute really quick just to address your question or your wondering.
Yes, that is my wonder. Like sometimes it's very difficult to actually come up with filling in the blanks on that statement. And when you're working with the teachers, trying to get them to explain it, I find that it's a challenge sometimes.
Mm-hmm. It is. And I think that is part of this idea of we have a misunderstanding of the statement of services and aids, and we, as a nation, have clouded this up a lot. There's a lot of noise in this area, and when we can really strip this back into the basics, it really helps clarify what you're saying, which enables the team to collect more relevant information about the student to incorporate in the class statement. And so We do have a presentation and resources specifically just on the statement of services and aids, and we're not going to go through all of that today, but we have a very fun interactive session. If any of you have joined that session, we have a game that's a part of it, and it really gets to helping people understand the nuance behind the 4 parts. Samara, can I have you back it up one slide?
Yep.
So the statement of services and aids, in addition to the 4 parts, really also talks about our obligation to ensure that students advance appropriately on their annual goals, but that are also involved and make progress in the general education curriculum. So we have it in the PLAB statement, we have it in the annual goal statement in under IDA, and we also have it in the statement of services and aids that says we need to ensure progress on their goals as well as progress in the general education setting. The kicker that a lot of people get in this statement is that it also requires us to provide these services in extracurricular activities and non-academic activities. We get a lot of ahas from people around that. And we also get a lot of questions about how do we ensure students participate with their non-disabled peers, especially when we have students who would be more in a self-contained environment, for lack of a better word, but an all-inclusive classroom for students that may be off of the general education curriculum track and having their own curriculum set forth through the IEP. So, overall, our statement of services and aids is the main driver for how we go about ensuring that students have access and make progress in the general education curriculum. This statement has very good indications of who is responsible for what. And I did see in the chat, somebody said, well, what happens when a student is in need of a related service such as speech, but they do not have a need for special education services? And if you attend our future training with us, or you go onto our website, we have several recordings from last year that go over this activity in this tip sheet in depth, and this section of the IEP in depth. It will explain to you exactly what we mean when we have a service that is allowing the student to access the general education curriculum, and you can see that in number 2, that is a special education service. It becomes a related service when it's allowing them to access their special education service. And I know that might cloud a lot of people's thoughts right now, and I don't have all the slides in here to help explain it better, but I did want to address that question. Is at times speech services can be special education services and not related services. Some of that is also based off your local context and your local regulations and the interpretation of that. For instance, I know in Georgia, speech services are always special education services. They are never related services. So please know that every local context has their own way of interpreting that. And but a lot of states follow the federal law that says special ed services increase access to the general education setting. Related services allow access to the special education services. And that's the difference between the two. So hopefully that helped a little bit. And Tamara's going to kind of monitor as I see some more questions coming in. If there's more people that would have some additional questions, please continue to share them in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer those. So on our next slide, we're going to look a little more in depth at this first part, which is around specially designed instruction. So you notice that we have 4 parts. Special education is the first one. This tip sheet looks at what is special education in general, and then what does it mean to have specially designed instruction, which falls under the special education services. And so specially designed instruction is the adaptation to the content, the methodology, and the delivery of instruction that we give students in order for them to access the general education based on their unique needs from the impact of their disability. This ensures that they can access and make progress to the educational standards that are set out by the local district and state. So this piece is what's allowing us to tie to those standards. Now, this doesn't mean we're saying write standards-based IEPs. What we're saying is that when we have our specially designed instruction happening for that student, it should be allowing the student, as they're closing that gap as you're teaching them, to be able to have better access and progress in the general education setting. What we see as a barrier to this is oftentimes we teach our specially designed instruction in isolation of what's currently happening in the general education curriculum, and the students struggle to generalize, or the content is so different that they're almost getting two different types of instructional routines. And so this is where collaboration between that general educator and the special educator becomes critical to increase that access and progress in the general education setting. Next slide. Okay, so then another part is the supplementary aids and services. And as you heard me say, the special education services allow access to the general education. Supplementary aids and services are provided in the regular education setting. Remember, we set the vocabulary words earlier. The general education curriculum is what is school for all students. The regular education classroom is a setting that we're talking about. So this is that general ed setting that we are having our kids try to be a part of. Our supplementary aids and services are put in place to allow the student to have these supports and aids while they're getting their specially designed instruction that's filling in their educational gaps. These services and aids are provided in that that regular education class. This is where the role of the general educator comes in. And many of our general educators do not understand that this is why they're so critical in that IEP meet. We need to know from their perspective of the child in their environment, how do they learn and what types of things do they need to be able to continue to make progress? Do they need a peer tutor? Do they need a visual schedule so that they can stay on track? Those are examples of supplementary aids and services that could be provided. And what happens is we often get in the routine. Many IEPs across the nation have check boxes where you just check, 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 check. And we don't stop and think about, how does this tie back to the present level statement? What did we say in the present level statement that says this student needs these services to access and make progress? This is really critical, and this is a great place to engage our general educators, and so they don't feel like they're just sitting at the table and signing the IEP. And I will say Dr. Bailey and I have done some presentations on this, and we've had several general ed people come up to us and say, wow, I thought my job was just to sign the IEP. I had no idea that I could bring forth information to the team. And I don't think anyone does that intentionally. It's just our job is our special education mindset is we got to get the information put into the document. We got to get that shared with the family. We have to come to agreement, and we just have to go through that process. And we forget that our general educators have valuable information. Sometimes it's hard because we send them an email and ask for their feedback and we don't get a response. But we do have some resources that may help you involve them a little bit more around getting to know your students. So we can share those in the chat as well. And I see a couple of people saying, I explicitly asked general educators in the meetings if the goals are aligned to the state standards. That's great. That's a great practice to help them see how the IEP goals connect back to what's happening in the general education setting. We also have one that says sometimes an IEP indicates a SDI approach that can be implemented by the general education teacher. Yes, if you go back to our tip sheet on SDI, it will say there's a little bubble that says who can do this, and you'll notice that it's not just the special educator that can implement SDI. It is whoever the IEP team deems qualified to implement those services. So for example, you might have a student who needs a certain type of methodology, a type of instructional routine that the special educator is not trained in. Let's say Orton Gillingham, I'm just going to pick one out. They need that structure, and you have a reading specialist who's trained in Orton Gillingham, and the IEP team may determine that that reading interventionist is going to provide the SDI for that student because they have the training in the background in Orton Gillingham to provide that for that student. So most of the time it's going to be your special educator or a paraprofessional, if allowed in your state, through the supervision of their special educator, will provide the SDI. But there are times when it's more appropriate that the SDI is provided by others. Tamara, am I missing any other questions?
No, I just wanted to kind of highlight, and sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. I think it's Tani or maybe Tanny. So again, I apologize if I'm saying your name wrong. But we, in terms of like the difference between what that student special education might be and their supplementing aids and services. So these are activities that we've done in for other presentations where we have them, name the service, what that looks like, and the difference between that. And we do that with all groups, special education teachers, general ed teachers, because just like, the point that you're raising, Tani, that sometimes they don't realize the difference between these things. So I just wanted to raise that because we talk about that and present about that quite often.
And Christine says to confirm IDA's intention is that specialized instruction does not need to be delivered by a specialist. Yes, you are correct, Christine. That is what it says. Will you flip back to that tip sheet, Tamara's one slide? And I think I'll have Tamara reshare this with you. If you go to this tip sheet that says, what is special education? Focus on specially designed instruction. On the back, this is we only did one screenshot of the front. If you flip it over or you scroll down to the second page, on the back, it'll say, ask you some questions. And one of them is who can provide SDI? And IDA does indicate that you can. Now, there are a few states in this nation that require a licensed special educator to provide the SDI. So make sure you know your state regs. There's only a couple, and most of you probably already know who you are. I believe it's Indiana, but I don't want to misspeak that it's Indiana. But there are a couple of states that require it like that. So do know that that's very much gives you some flexibility. That's something that we also talk about, the flexibility this gives you when you're talking about staffing shortages and when you have less special education teachers because of the crisis we're in with special educators. It does give you some flexibility to think about who else could help provide the SDI. Yes, doing more with less. I feel like that is like the slogan of all of our careers right now is doing more with less. So Susan asked, but it needs to be designed by the special educator. It does not need to be designed by the special educator. It needs to be designed by the IEP team. It is the IEP team's responsibility, not just the special educator. They are a member of that team, but they are only one member of that team. And so I think that's a critical piece to also help the burden not feel like it completely falls on the special educator. So in that IEP team meeting, we discussion of what that looks like for the design of the SDI. The whole team is making that decision and saying this might be better designed and delivered by a certain staff member due to their background. And then Tamara did put that tip sheet back into the chat if you guys want to read the back of it. Yes, and Amy, thank you. This is why collective efficacy is so valuable. This is why we need to have high expectations and that sense of a collective efficacy, because we all have a role in ensuring these 4 areas of service are provided to our students. So Tamara, you can advance it to the next slide. So when we look at how this all fits together, and when we think about And I see a couple more questions coming in, and we'll answer those in just a second. But I want to kind of give this visual representation of what we're talking about here. So how do the parts of the statement of services and aid fit together to provide access and benefit in the general education setting? So again, that's what our whole session is about. How do we increase this? How do we leverage these services that we're giving students to increase their ability to make progress in that general education curriculum? So if you look at the left side of your screen, you see that we have the boxes of the parts of the statement of services and aids. We have special education, we have related services, supplementary aids and services, and then we have program modifications and support for school personnel. You can see that special education services and related services, and you'll see there's a dashed line because not every child requires related services. But those two services together are the instructional routines that happen that are filling in the gaps. So they are what we're teaching students, that's what is taught in order for them to then go to that middle box that allows access and progress in the general ed. So if they're learning a reading skill to like decoding to become more fluent, and they're practicing fluency in the general education setting, we are giving them an instructional routine that's allowing them to access that general ed. When we get to the supplementary aids and services, notice that there's no box to special ed or related services. It is a box to general ed. They are provided in the general education setting, the regular education classroom, and they are the services and aids that we give students that support them in that environment while they're getting their instruction on their skill gaps. So they're getting their special education and their related services, and they're filling in those gaps. And now we need to provide some sort of aids and supports in the regular ed setting because we know that there's a large gap and they're not able to independently access that without help. And so those services are what allows them to do that while we're filling in the gaps in our instruction. And there's a lot of confusion around those areas. And so if that's something in your district that is highly confusing, or you feel like there's some misunderstanding or misinterpretation, we highly recommend that this is the area that you start building an understanding of the statement of services and aids so that people can then think about how we implement what we're doing for students within our school building. You'll notice this bottom one that says program modifications and support for school personnel. It's one of the more underutilized parts of the IEP. Program modifications should not be confused with instructional modifications, which could also happen under supplementary aids and services. Supplementary aids and services are often referenced in our IEP documents and in our vocabulary around accommodations and modifications. A program modification is when we're looking at an alternative curriculum, or we're looking at a shortened school day, or something that changes how that student experiences school, and it makes it different than how every other student experiences school. So a lot of students don't need a program modification because they experience school like everybody else, just with some services in special ed and some supplementary aids and services. But if they do need an alternative curriculum, or they need a shortened day, or they need a specialized schedule based on their disability, it would be a program modification that may need to be addressed in that part. Supports for school personnel is also underutilized. This is our place in the IEP where we can say staff needs specialized training in order to put this program in place. And that helps us identify. So we see this more often with students with physical limitations, where we have OTs and PTs that will say when a new staff is working with the student, they need to go through training from our OT and PT to know how to stand them, how to appropriately change them, those types of things. But this could be utilized for all of our students. If they need training on a behavior plan, and paraprofessionals need to have training, or the librarian needs training, this is where we can put that in the IEP. Those fall under allowing the student to access their special ed services and the general education setting. So we have a question that says, where do accommodations fit extra time? Those accommodations and modifications are supplementary aids and services. The reason we don't call them accommodations and modifications is it's not actually found in IDEA. They are one type of accommodation or excuse me, accommodations and modifications are a type of supplementary aids and services, but there are many others. You could have assistive technology. You could have a sign language interpreter. So there's a lot of other types of things that go into that. Most of the IEP documents that we have seen at Progress Center from across the nation don't call it supplementary aids and services. They call it accommodations and modifications. So there's a disconnect and people get very confused in that. So know that you have to be aware that it's really supplementary aids and services under IDEA. Many places in the nation call it accommodations and modifications. The reason it's broader in the terminology under IDEA is they want to ensure that we're talking about any service or aid available to the student. Sometimes people perceive that they may not fall under an accommodation or a modification. It may be a service and that they feel like it's left out. So that's some of the difference. Is there any other questions I'm missing, Tamara?
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes,
I think
of
I can.
course.
I'm just wondering, supports about supplementary aids and services, and some folks' belief that that always means a person, an additional person.
Yes. So that's a common question, Rachel. Thank you for raising that because we get a lot of questions. It could be a person, but what this goes back to is identifying needs in the class statement. And we need to have data and information that would indicate why a child would need that type of service. Could a paraprofessional in the general education setting be something that a child needs? Yes, but we should have very strong data and evidence that is laid out within the present level statement that would indicate why and what is the actual service. That's the difference. What is the service that person is providing to the child? Just being in the classroom and redirecting is not any different than what a teacher can do. And so we have to think about identifying what is the actual service needed. Does that answer your question, Rachel?
It does. It does. I think, we just have to continue to do our learning with our folks and making sure that they are, connecting everything back to their, I call it a pleb, but to their plebs. So, yeah. And the service piece is a big one. 'Cause
Yes,
I think
it is.
sometimes too, when you are waiting to see if we need to intervene, waiting to see, and that's not really its purpose.
Yes,
So, thank you.
exactly. And the other one we get a lot, Rachel, is about this, especially around a person, is that we have to remember that our job as the IEP team is to develop the IEP. Once the IEP is developed, it is on the district. Granted, we're a part of the district as certain members of the team, but not every member. The parents are not. But it is on the district to figure out how they're going to implement that. So that is the responsibility of the district to say, if this is what the IEP team has defined as the services and the programming that's needed, what do we have available to do that? So that's why it could look different if I'm in one district with my student and I move to another district, and they may choose to implement different. And even though I'm a parent, I might be frustrated with that. It's up to the district to figure out what they have to be able to do. They still have to meet the needs. They still have to provide the services, but it may look different from district to district based on staffing, a curriculum that is available, tools and resources that are available. And so we often see a lot of families who want a certain curriculum. And this is why the courts have continually ruled with districts around that. Is that they are saying that it's really up to the district on the implementation. Now, best practice is that our families understand why we're implementing it the way we're implementing it. And when we get back to what you were just saying, Rachel, around we're focused on what is the service that needs to be provided, really, really helps dissipate any of the advantageous relationships that we have, because the family understands, oh, they need this, and this is how we're meeting that through this service. And you're right, it is about an educational piece to the staff on how they can do that. Tamara, is there any other questions? I did see that there was a question about where can we find our state regs to know if they allow that. You can usually go to your Department of Ed at your state level, and you can search your regulations, state regulations around special education, and you should be able to then do like a word search under special education, and then look up if there's any special rules or regulations that have been devoted that. You could also call your state department and their special education department to ask them what the regulations are. So that's a great question. Federal regulations, you can find those by going to the US Department of Ed, and you can search up IDEA regulations, and you'll be able to find those there. And you'll be able to filter through those as well. In our slides, as they become available, our slide deck, many of those are linked. You'll see that in the tip sheet. If you go to the tip sheet on the website, you'll see the federal regulations linked there. We don't link the state ones, we link the federal ones. So if that's helpful for you as well. And I just want you to know, I did see somebody put in there that if you are from California, and I am not aware of any other states, but I know California doesn't call it STI, they call it SAI. It is the same thing. California just uses that terminology versus the federal language of specially designed instruction. They use specialized academic instruction. So I do want to make that. I see a couple people called that out. It was in our Anne's Q&A, as well as a couple people in the chat. All right. Any other questions that we can help clarify? Okay, there is a good question here. It says, does program modifications also include supports families may need to ensure IEP goals are met? That is a great question, Amy. That actually falls under related services. So there is a portion, if you go to the related service tip sheet, you'll see that they call it family counseling. And I think that word is very broad in their sense of interpretation of that. Families can, supports for families to be able to help meet the IEP goals or learn how to support their child. For example, we use an assistive technology like an AAC device to help them communicate. The family needs to help them communicate at home. We can do a short period of time where we educate the parent on how to use that device so the child can access that device in all the areas that they need. And that actually falls under related services and not program modifications or support for school personnel. So Tamara did link, she did link the tip sheet for related services there. So you can see parent counseling and training in that and how to utilize that. That is also very underutilized. We see a lot of people do that for behavior plans to help families. Now remember, we're used to writing services for an entire year because we get programmed, but a service could last for 3 weeks. And so a lot of times we see districts write services for shorter time frames based on the need of the family to be able to help support whatever is happening within that IEP for that child. Great questions. Keep them coming, and Tamara and I will try to answer them or share the resources as we move through that. Next slide, Tamara.
Yeah, so I'm going to move us into our next section where we really start to focus on those instructional and behavioral practices that promote access for our students with disabilities. So we'll focus on these 3 evidence-based instructional practices, so cognitive and metacognitive strategies, teaching social behaviors, and instructional technology. So one resource that we are going to link for you are going to be our Progress Center instructional briefs. So there's going to be there's going to be a brief for each of these instructional practices that'll go in depth. So again, they're downloadable. So just similar to how the resources that we've already shared, like the tip sheets, the instructional practices will be in a similar format for each of the briefs. It covers, what teachers need to know about each of these instructional practices. It goes into the planning and the individualization of this instruction, how it promotes access to the general education classroom, and then how to get started in implementing these instructional practices or instructional and behavioral practices. So what do you need to know? So when you're accessing these resources, you'll see this graphic that you see on the right-hand side included in these instructional briefs. So it'll be looking at this cycle that you'll go through in terms of planning your instruction, delivering the instruction, and then the review and the intensify. So when we think about planning the instruction, and this may be review for all of you, but when you think about planning, so setting that meaningful learning target, and we've already talked about the basis for this, right? So thinking about those high expectations, that buzzword rigor that we talked about. So setting those meaningful learning targets for our students, determining the sequence of that instruction and setting those clear objectives. So when we think about how we want students to reach those learning targets, how are we systematically going to design their instruction so that they're reaching these learning targets? So that happens at the planning stage. And then in the next stage, thinking about how that instruction is going to be delivered. So thinking about modeling and think alouds, designing those opportunities for students to practice and also the opportunities for students to respond. And then also just to really highlight, this is also based on research, right? So what's going to be impactful for our students and in the ways that they're learning, and the way you're utilizing these instructions. And then that final step there, reviewing and intensifying. So, if it's necessary, you have to think about how students are responding to this instruction in order for them to meet their goals, right? So if you set a learning target and you're not seeing students make progress, so making those necessary adaptations, whether it's in the content, the delivery, or the methodology in which you're presenting that instruction to meet the individual needs of students. And then this cycle, it just keeps going, right? So once you review and you intensify, you might go back to planning stage. Is this learning target appropriate for the student? Do I need to plan how the systematic approach to how the student will meet these goals? Is it really in chunks where students are going to be able to learn and reach that learning target? And this cycle remains for both those academic and those behavioral goals. And then the next focus here is going to be on cognitive and metacognitive strategies. So Sarah did go ahead and share the link to the instructional briefs. So on the next slide here, you'll see just the first page of the cognitive and the metacognitive strategies. So on the tip sheet, you'll see how it's defined from the research, where it is focusing on different strategies to help our students focus on their executive functioning. So those are areas of attention, self-monitoring, and their working memory. Sorry. So this is going to be just a short video that explains the examples of the metacognitive and cognitive strategies. So I'm going to play this for you, and then we'll have just a brief overview of it afterwards.
Cognitive and metacognitive strategies can help students build executive functioning skills. So, what are they? Cognitive strategies target cognitive processes considered necessary for student success in school, such as memory, attribution, and attention. These mental activities ultimately direct thinking and learning, so cognitive strategies attempt to help students redirect these areas of cognition towards relevant information and appropriate tasks. Some examples of cognitive strategies include setting goals, using mnemonics, and using graphic organizers. Metacognitive strategies are strategies that enable students to become more aware of how they think and how they can independently regulate their cognitive processes. Examples include self-talk, self-monitoring, and self-management strategies. Teaching students with disabilities cognitive strategies may not be enough to ensure that these strategies are implemented successfully or independently. To support students' use of cognitive strategies, teachers compared the teaching of cognitive strategies with metacognitive strategies. This process allows students to see them in context and understand how the strategies can be used and generalized to other tasks and settings.
So yeah, just a short video to kind of set the stage of what those cognitive and metacognitive strategies are. So the thinking and then the thinking about their thinking. So within this, you saw, set how important it is for students to set their own goals and engage in their self-monitoring and self-management of whether it's their academics or their behavior, and then the use of those graphic organizers. So in the next couple of slides, you're also going to see just a couple more examples of what this can look like. Maybe these are things that you have used previously, or maybe this is new. So this is just one approach that may be helpful for students in terms of their executive functioning. This is called the Get Ready, Do, Done model. So in this, it uses a backwards planning. So that's why you'll see the 3, 2, 1 there. So the first thing you'll focus on is that right-hand side where the red is. That's the done column where they're identifying what a task will look like when it's done, and when it might need to be turned in by. And then that middle column there, what steps do they need to know or to take in order for it to be done? So again, like that systematic approach to how they can ensure they can get that task done. And then finally on the left-hand side, the get ready. So what do I need to do? So what do they need? What are the materials that are going to be needed in order for them to complete those tasks? So this is just one way that one strategy that can be used. Another strategy here is just, other tools or graphic organizers that could be used for them. So on the left side here, it's starting to engage their feelings more about some of these tasks. There are a lot of tasks for students that might be preferred or not preferred. So, how do they feel about certain parts of the task? What was their score before? What was their score after? And then on the right-hand side, they're thinking about their thinking. So thinking about that metacognition, right? So there are just some questions like, how hard do I view this task to be? And they'll be able to rate it. And then how long did this task take me? So thinking about all of the important parts of a task, right? Whether it's preferred or non-preferred, their feelings towards that. How long did the task take me? And do they feel like they have the skills in order to complete said task? So this is another tool that might support those cognitive and metacognitive strategies that we may be using in the classrooms. And then finally, more resources, right? So in terms of cognitive and metacognitive strategies, we've already shared the instructional practice briefs. You'll be able to read more in depth about what that looks like and what it is. In addition to that, this is the first time I think we shared one of our self-paced modules with you all, but Progress Center does have self-paced modules. There is a course on teaching cognitive and metacognitive strategies to students. We also have linked a learning module from the Cedar Center, if you're familiar with them, on cognitive and metacognitive strategies. And then also another federally funded center, the Iris Center. Some of you may be familiar with them, but they also have self-paced modules on executive functions that you may also be able to utilize. So all of these things will be linked for you. But again, these are also things that are going to be accessible on the Progress Center website. And then I'm going to, sorry.
Before you go off of cognitive, metacognitive strategies, I just want to know how many of you have had the experience of teaching students the same academic task over and over year after year? Like they maybe have it one day and they don't have it another day. They make some progress, but not a lot of progress. And you're feeling, I see lots of thumbs up, and this is an issue. What we're really finding emerging in the research, and why this is one of the strategies that we highlighted, is that if you're experiencing this, I don't know your student, so I cannot say for sure, but what we have found often is the case is that they're lacking a cognitive and metacognitive skill set that allows them to access that academic instruction. So if you're really feeling frustrated with a not knowing what else to do, and you feel like all your tools are out of your tool bag, and you're going, I'm not sure what else to do with this kiddo in this academic task. I want to really encourage you to increase your skill set and knowledge around cognitive and metacognitive strategies and some of the things that you can do. Tamara really highlighted a couple very simple ones that are resources that you could think about. But this is probably one of the most powerful. It really is important in middle school and high school. When we get to middle school and high school and we talk about reading instruction, and they've been doing the same reading instruction for years after year, at some point we really have to think about what is it about their way of managing the information or their recall or their memory skills that isn't allowing them to either pull the information out that they have learned or retain information that you've been giving them so that they can be successful. Some of the other things are like mnemonics, using mnemonics in order for them to remember things. Like there's lots of things, and our online module explains it more in depth, gives some more strategies. It is free, so that's a great place for you to start, but there's a lot of information around this. We hear it as executive function, but executive function is just one part of cognitive and metacognitive. And so I just want to encourage you that if that's where you're feeling like you are struggling a little bit with your students, that this might be an area to focus your academic instruction around so that they can benefit more from those academic tasks you're asking them to do. We get that question a lot is, what do I do when I have a student just, making minimal progress year after year? So I just encourage you guys to seek out some of that if you can. Yes. Oh, the link is not working. Oh, we'll get it. We'll get the correct link for you, Chris, for the module. Tamara will do that while I'm talking about the next section. So our next section we're going to talk about, and if you go to our website and you see evidence-based practices, you're actually going to see 6 evidence-based practices, and we're only covering 3. The other 3 are planning and delivering and intensifying instruction and the process we should go through for students with disabilities. So if you're interested in that, that's great. But these are the individualized strategies that we can use for every kiddo that we wanted to highlight. And actually, we've done this with private school practitioners. We've done this with some charter school practitioners. If we have any charter school members here today, this is something that is very universal to anyone when we think about how we interact with students with disabilities in this area. So next slide, when we talk about teaching social behaviors, is this really focuses on what the behavioral expectations are for struggling learners. So this not only addresses behavior, which we all know is an increasing need in our school systems, but it's also looking at not just what we think of as externalizing behaviors, but also the behaviors needed for academic learning, the behaviors needing to be able to be socially appropriate in different settings, and being able to shift those mindsets from one setting to another. And so this is a little bit broader than just behavior when we think about that in our typical mind around behaviors. And so you'll see this instructional brief that is linked back to the original one that has all 6 of them. And it's set up the same way that Tamara opened up about, where we have the plan, deliver, review, and intensify. And it gives some of the research behind the critical need for teaching social behaviors to our students with disabilities. Next slide. So when we think about that, what do we mean by social behaviors? We break this down into 5, or the research really breaks this down into 5 critical pieces: teaching self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. So you can see that this goes above and beyond just thinking about a replacement behavior. This is really about thinking about how does a student interact in all of the school environments that or activities or extracurricular environments that they're going to be in. And this really is about communication. What we know about these behaviors is that they are learned. Even with students who learn them age appropriate, they are still actually being taught these behaviors in some way. Sometimes they're being taught by a peer, sometimes they're being taught by watching somebody. Our students with disabilities may need more explicit instruction in this, and they might need someone to break down some of these individual behavior and help them understand what it is, awareness, and strategies they can use to be aware of that. And then they need to be reinforced. So this is something that they are going to learn over time, but we have to continually reinforce them. Yes, I do think that we do have some adults that are still working on some of these behaviors. I do appreciate that comment in the chat. It is true. We do have people that need that, and we need to reinforce the appropriate expectations and really helping them understand what those are. So the next slide is going to show us some examples. And, oh, excuse me. These are going to be our keys to explicitly teaching these. So when we're teaching these 5 social behaviors that we need to, we really have to break it down into these 3 areas. We first have to select a replacement behavior that we want the student to learn. And then we have to modify for the different classrooms that they're in, different school environments, the school bus. And then we need to implement a system that promotes replacing the behavior. What we often see happening in our schools right now when we have a lot of behavioral needs is that we jump to the third one, where we implement a system that really more manages the behavior instead of promotes the use of the replacement behavior. And so I definitely think that we have to take a step back and think, what do we want them to be doing? What is socially acceptable for us and what can we manage? What can the different environments? Myself as a teacher versus Tamara may be able to manage different types of things in our classrooms, and I might be able to be accepting of certain things that Tamara isn't, or vice versa. And so we have to be able to adapt that replacement behavior across settings, and then we need to promote the use of that replacement behavior. So what does that potentially look like in action? Let's check some ideas out. So we're going to look at how we can utilize the I do, we do, you do, or explicit teaching, the concept of explicit instruction in this.
Hello, this is Mom.
Where we are looking at modeling and what are our clear expectations, what do we have planned examples. When we use the I do, we do, you do, one of the reasons we see people struggle with this concept is that they have clear expectations, but they don't plan examples that are meaningful to the child and meaningful to that replacement behavior that we're teaching. And then we look at practice. We want to be able to give them guided and independent practice. And then supporting those practices is by increasing the amount of feedback we have. You can see that we can use schedules on the side and how our Monday schedule could help us practice. The first time I listen, what is safe body? In specialists, what's the first time of listening, what does a safe body look like? So we can use some of that explicit instruction where we're setting the clear expectation, we're giving examples, we're giving guided practice. Next slide.
Real quick before we move on, this particular visual is from a module from the National Center on Intensive Intervention. They have an explicit instruction course, so I am going to link that in the chat if you want to learn more there.
Great, good idea, Tamara. I didn't even think about that. That's a really great course that goes above and beyond just teaching social behaviors, but also teaching using explicit instruction to teach any skill set to a student. So back to our teaching social behaviors, here's some examples. These are probably more elementary based examples, but these are ways that we could reward or reinforce the replacement behavior. We can see that we have visual cues that can be utilized with students when we're asking them and that remind them their pattern or what they are supposed to be doing in the replacement behavior, like raising their hand, eyes, or paying attention, listening to others, keeping our voice down, so that they can be prompted to be using that replacement behavior that we're seeking over time. Often we see a rewards chart like the one on the screen without the pairing of those other guiding supports, such as the visual aids. And so it's the students sometimes struggle to be able to be reinforced because they have forgotten or are not able to connect what their reinforcing behavior are. Next slide. So just like in our previous one, we have a list of resources. There is a online module about teaching social behaviors that goes a little more in depth than what we're able to in this short section of our presentation today. We have wonderful self-paced courses on behavior. There are 8 of them. And they start very high level around understanding behavior, and they dive very deep into intensive behavior. And you can use each one of those independently, or you can use them as a series. They are also freely available to you. So if behavior is, oh, the screen share is off. Are other people not seeing the screen? Just, oh, okay, people can still see them. Christine will try to work on that for you. I'm not sure what happened there, but thank you for those.
I think she's okay now.
Okay, perfect. Just wanted to make sure we didn't lose our presentation. So those behavior courses are great, and they give really great examples. If you have people that are really struggling to help understanding behaviors, what behavior communicates, I highly encourage you to seek out those self-paced courses. And then, of course, we have the Center on PBIS. They have some practice guides that look at supporting students' social and emotional behavioral needs that may help you also address some of the social behaviors. We could do a separate presentation on each one of these and go deep into metacognitive and cognitive and social behaviors. And then, of course, our instructional technology. We don't have time for that today, but we are trying to help you seek out some resources that you can utilize to grow your skills or provide some additional supports for staff that you work with.
Perfect. And then continuing on with our last evidence-based practice that we're sharing with you today. Again, there are more that are going to be on our Progress Tenet website that you'll be able to review. But instructional technology, where we focus on how instructional technology can boost those academic and behavior instruction for our students. So here within that, planning to use clear, measurable objectives for how you're going to incorporate technology. So I'm sure sometimes you often see where maybe some type of instructional technology may be used, but it doesn't have a true purpose for how it's being used. So making sure that there's a very strategic way in which that instructional technology is going to be used and how it might be enhancing the learning for that student. Evaluating the instructional technology's appropriateness. So again, aligning with what is the reason for why we're going to be using that instructional technology, but also is it appropriate for this? And then using formative assessments to monitor student progress that's specific to their learning outcomes. So again, you're kind of seeing the alignment here, right? Not just using it because, students are using a lot of technology, but making sure that there's a purpose for it, that it's appropriate, and then monitoring how appropriate it might be in that student's progress. And then reviewing the formative and summative data. And then lastly, as needed, intensifying and individualizing the instruction that's aligned with the use of that instructional technology. And then what does it look like in practice? So connections in the classroom, so things that you're probably already seeing. So what does that instructional technology look like if you're using it for student practice and then providing that feedback and then engagement? So it can be used in a variety of ways. You might already be using these things. So I know we have used things like Kahoot in our own practices where we might be gamifying, but you're also having some learning there too. Quizzes. I'm not sure if you're using that. I use that as a teacher, but also when I'm providing professional learning, you may be using a lot of other tools in terms of engagement or even ways to gather feedback from students. And then other ways to be used, it can be used for progress monitoring and then individualized goal setting. Again, this might be a review for you all because there may be things that you're already doing in your district, but these are just screen grabs from iExcel and Reflex. So just different instructional technology tools that may be used for progress monitoring or individual goal setting. And then here, of course, leaving you with some resources that are aligned with instructional technology. So we've already provided that instructional practice brief for you on instructional technology. But again, there's also a self-paced module on the Progress Center's website that will go more in depth on instructional technology. I did link in the chat the full catalog to all of our online modules, so you'll see that there. In addition to that, there's going to be a teacher guide on digital learning on the U.S. Department of Ed's website. And then lastly, a resource that we like to highlight is from the Center on Inclusive Technology and Education Systems, where they review teaching practices for teaching in inclusive technology systems.
One thing I want to share, Tamara, really quick before we head into the last part of our session is that we get a lot of questions about what is the difference between instructional technology and assistive technology. And I think we want to make sure we're really clear here that we are talking about instructional technology. And these are pieces of technology that allow them to access and make progress in the general education setting. Assistive technology is a required service that is needed in order for the child to make progress in any of their educational experiences, including special education. And so there is a very distinct difference between assistive technology and instructional technology. Assistive technology can be a service within the IEP. Instructional technology can be utilized as an accommodation, but is also a strategy in which we utilize to engage students with their learning. And so just be aware of that because there's a lot of confusion around that and they are very different and distinct. There's usually assistive technology teams and people within districts that help you identify what types of assistive technology are needed based on the impact of the student's disability. These instructional technologies are really about how we utilize technology in the instructional way to allow them to access and make progress in the general education setting. So before we move on to our closing, I just want to pose the question to the audience, and we are going to get out of here a little early today, which is great because I know it's been a long day of learning, but really fast. What are you guys, when you think about these three strategies, cognitive, metacognitive, teaching social behaviors, or instructional technology, which one do you feel your current location that you're at is in need of the most? Which one of these strategies could you take back and really work on utilizing or increasing knowledge and awareness and understanding around in your local context? So I'm just curious, out of those three, which one do you feel? Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of teaching the cognitive and metacognitive strategies, a few of the technology and a few for the social behaviors, but quite a few of the metacognitive and cognitive. Yes. I thank you guys for sharing that. It's very interesting to Tamara and I when we look at this because that is very common, that after people really understand cognitive and metacognitive strategies, that is where they need to go. And I do really encourage you that teaching cognitive and metacognitive also we see has side effects of dissipating behaviors. Sometimes utilizing the instructional technology as a support to the cognitive and metacognitive, like a schedule and a routine, is always helpful as well. Did you go over that one, Tamara? Sorry.
Yeah,
Perfect.
sorry, I did.
I just was curious. I appreciate you guys participating and sharing out, but overwhelmingly it is cognitive and metacognitive. So encourage you to keep doing that. We did have a session from Prepping for Progress last year that was strictly on cognitive and teaching cognitive and metacognitive strategies. So they did go a little more in depth than Tamara and I were able to today, as we were trying to cover that big picture of access and progress in the general ed. So
Yeah. And I did, well, I guess I'll put the link in the chat again, just so it's at the top there. But I did link to all the session materials. So we're Strand 2, so you'll be able to access the PowerPoint for today. And then all of the resources that we've linked in the chat will also be there, readily available for you. And then Sarah just mentioned the session on the cognitive and metacognitive strategies from our last Prepping for Progress event. So if you scroll all the way to the bottom under related resources, you'll be able to go to our 2024 event and access some of these sessions that we have mentioned today. All right, so I'm going to wrap us up today. So here you have heard us reference our website for the Progress Centers several times throughout this presentation today. But we invite you to visit our website because there are a plethora of other resources that we have not mentioned today outside of our tip sheets that we haven't mentioned today. We have some about the disability categories if that's what you're looking for. So, and other modules that we haven't talked to you about today, webinars, just so many resources that may be valuable to you, especially as we gear up for a new school year that may target some of those areas you may be wanting to target or provide professional learning in. So we invite you to our website. It is promotingprogress.org. If for whatever reason you have additional needs, there is going to be a tab there to request support where you provide your information and then what perhaps you might be looking for. Even if you have a question about our resources, we invite you to reach out to us. Anything to add?
I was gonna say, I did put in the chat that link to support. So if you're like, we referenced some other presentations that we've done, and if we can help in any way, we often do calls. People are like, how can I help support this in my district or in my state? We're here to help support you in any way we can. Again, we're federally funded. And so we like to be able to connect you to the resources from other centers as well as us. And if there's any way we can help your district, your local education agency, your state department, move some of this work forward, we would love to connect with you. So email us at that request support box, and we'll set up a virtual meeting and see what we can do to support you guys.
Yep. And then lastly, ways to stay connected with us. So we do have a Facebook, we have X or Twitter. And then we're also on YouTube. So the videos that we share with you today are going to be accessible on YouTube. So feel free to follow us to stay connected with us and or reach out to us with any questions or additional support you may need from us.